Hey everyone, and welcome to yet another rendition in my Countries at Their Greatest Extent series. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, you can go find them on my channel, where there is a playlist for it. Before you ask for a country to cover next, it may be worth checking if I've already covered it. But with that said, let's get to the video. First, we'll take a look at France. France has had several peaks in its history. In Europe, there was the Frankish or Carolingian Empire, which stretched across much of Europe. During the height of Napoleon, if you include client states, France reached a similar territorial extent in Europe. But in terms of total area under French rule, France was at its peak during the Second Colonial Empire in the 1800s, with their vast holdings in Africa. The First Colonial Empire, which peaked in the 1700s, technically reached a similar size, although the French North American territories were not solidly under French control, just claimed by France, with them only really controlling trading outposts and forts throughout the region, with some exceptions in Canada where there were a few notable settlements. If you combine all of that, you get all the territory that has ever been under French rule, which certainly is impressive and comparable to even the British Empire at its height, although these lands were of course held at different time periods. As for a more realistic Greater France, a scenario where they achieve France's quote-unquote natural borders along the Rhine seems the most feasible to me. France was offered such a border in the Frankfurt proposals, which would have ended the War of the Sixth Coalition, but Napoleon still expected to win the war, so he never agreed before it was too late. Before we move on, I would like to give a big thanks to this video's sponsor, Daily Peanut, who provide a great alternative to traditional news that I think you guys will be interested in. Some days the news is a tough pill to swallow. That's why Daily Peanut gives you a daily dose of news in equal parts humor and substance. Daily Peanut is an easy way to filter out the noise and learn more about the world news that matters. Join over 250,000 readers and get educated and entertained, delivered right to your inbox every morning. Sign up for free with the link in the description and comment section. Iran, or as it was more commonly referred to throughout history, Persia, has reached several impressive peaks in its history, as it has an ancient history and has been an important empire since some of our earliest historical records. By far the greatest extent it reached was during the Achaemenid Empire, where it ruled as far east as the Indus River Valley and as far west as Egypt and Greece. It would never again surpass this or rule over much else, although the Sassanids did rule the Arabian coast, and the Iranian Ghurid dynasty ruled over more of India, expanding the total land any rendition of Persia or Iran has ever held. As Iran ended up surrounded by powerful colonial empires, it would have been difficult for them to end up much larger today. But with that still in mind, I do think a somewhat feasible Greater Iran would have been one that managed to keep and strengthen its grip over Azerbaijan in the early 1800s, and negotiated very slightly more favorable borders with the British colonies to the east. Hungary today is a shell of its former self. For most of its history as an established European kingdom, it controlled pretty much the entire Pannonian Basin, with the Carpathians as a natural mountainous border. They peaked in territory when they had a personal union over Poland in the Middle Ages. If you combine that with their former personal unions over Bohemia and Naples, as well as the territory they held when they were a part of Austria-Hungary, you get all the land Hungary ever held, quite a large portion of Europe. A realistic Greater Hungary, in my opinion, is one in a scenario where the Allies were more lenient with Hungary following World War I. Hungary was punished very severely, despite many Hungarian officials having been against the war in the first place, so they could perhaps have kept most of Transylvania and Vojvodina, regions which were home to many Hungarians, although it would make Hungary a very diverse nation with many minority groups, including Serbs and Romanians. The Netherlands is another nation which has been cut down to size quite a bit. The Netherlands peaked in European territory right after the Napoleonic Wars and before Belgium got their independence. In total international territory, they peaked in the 1900s though, when they had fully colonized the Dutch East Indies or modern Indonesia. If you add colonial holdings before that, such as in North America and South Africa, you get all the territory the Dutch have ever held. A realistic Greater Netherlands, as I see it, would be one where the United Kingdom of the Netherlands survived, with Belgium never gaining independence, either because they avoid the Belgian Revolution or if they manage to defeat the Belgian uprising. Now, having covered the Netherlands and in a previous episode Luxembourg as well, I might as well finish up the Benelux region. In Europe, after the Belgian Revolution, Belgium was effectively in control of Luxembourg, as well as most of the Dutch Limburg region that is today a part of the Netherlands. On top of that, the Congo was also under the control of the Belgian king in the 1800s, so this is the largest territorial extent of Belgium, and everything it ever controlled, with the exception of some minor regions such as in Tianjin and other places too small to be shown. A realistic Greater Belgium, as I see it, would be one in a scenario where the 1839 Treaty of London was never signed. The purpose of the treaty was for the Netherlands to recognize Belgium as a sovereign nation, and in exchange they would get a border revision where the Netherlands got the today Dutch portion of the Limburg region. Luxembourg was also recognized as independent, although it would lose most of its territory to Belgium. If this treaty had not been signed, Belgium would likely have kept their lands, and the Netherlands would with time be forced to recognize Belgium, although they likely wouldn't until a much later date. As for this video's smaller country, we'll take a look at Brunei. Brunei today is a tiny remnant of a much larger entity that existed for centuries before. It is a result of colonialism, as the British took basically all of Brunei, leaving them with two tiny regions in the area of their capital. Brunei peaked in the 1500s when it held much of Borneo, as well as large portions of the modern Philippines. A realistic Greater Brunei, in my opinion, would be in a scenario where it manages to keep its 1800s borders before colonization by the British. There are instances of countries avoiding colonization, like Thailand, which managed to modernize and maneuver politically around being colonized. So if Brunei achieved a similar feat, it is possible they could have kept their lands. But that's all for now. Hope this shorter video taking a look at a few irredentist scenarios in countries at their greatest historical extent was interesting. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell button if you enjoyed the video. Also, don't forget to check out our sponsor, Daily Peanut. See you next time.